My name is Jon Turnqvist, and I am the moderator of this event for the ISTP. And we are going to talk about the Tokyo Olympics. And we have with us a good group of panelists. So I'm so happy about that. We have Mr. Tomohiko Taniguchi, who was the former advisor to Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. And we have Dr. Barbara Holtes, who has written a book about, or several books about Japan and the Olympics. And we also have Miss Vanessa Osel-Chiruga, who is a resident of Tokyo and is following, of course, what is happening. So I have asked Dr. Holtes to start us off with a short presentation of her recent findings. So please go ahead, Barbara.
All right. So I'm sharing my screen. I hope you can see that. So good morning or good afternoon from me. So yeah, Jon asked me for a quick input presentation, so that gets us all started for our discussion. Well, and I chose the title here, The Pandemic Olympics, because I fear that Tokyo 2020 or 2021 is not going to be the name in the future that is going to be used when we look back at this year's Olympics. And that's, of course, rather unfortunate for Tokyo, but we'll discuss that. Let me go on to the next. So 3 little points I'd like to talk about. One is the vision, the dreams and the hopes that Japan, Tokyo originally had when applying for these games. Then just briefly, a 2-minute on the COVID-19 pandemic situation in Japan, and then the impact on the Olympic Games. So I think it's very important to remember what Japan tried to accomplish with these games. And that was really to reinvent itself, to create a new, a better self, and particularly to relive the success of Tokyo 1964, which was unanimously known as very successful Olympics. They wanted to create a sort of the image of cool Japan, while at the same time also show themselves as like this high technological top player again. The games were supposed to give this huge economic boost to Japan. Japan was expecting 40 million visitors to the country in 2020. And at the same time, also within Japan, they wanted to create a new volunteer culture by having 110,000 volunteers at the games, having had that wonderful, amazing, exciting experience, so that they would be willing as alumni to be volunteering for different things within Japanese society that might be a little less hip than volunteering for the Olympics. But at the same time, also, they wanted to portray themselves as a country that lives diversity, inclusiveness, and sustainability. And I hope we'll eventually have time to discuss these aspects, how much of these aspects will be able to maintain if the Olympics are held this year. So, and then we have the pandemic itself. That is, I think, important. Whenever you talk about a country, it's important to ask compared to what, right? Are the infection rates large or small? Is the government response good or bad? So it really matters. What we have right now is the 4th wave of rising infections in Japan. Today actually was supposed to, I'm so sorry, was supposed to be, the last day of the state of emergency. And that has been extended to June 20th. The infection rates, well, compared to the West, the infection rates look really, really good. But if you compare it to its East Asian neighbors, Japan has the highest infection rates. The vaccine, I'm so sorry, my phone keeps ringing. And the vaccine rollout is, if you compare it to any of its highly industrialized countries, it's rather slow and haphazard. So sorry. We have, in any case, a really overwhelmed medical system. And despite these comparatively small numbers. And when we look now at the Olympics and the impact, I think we can sum it up as there's much to lose, but very little to gain. The anti-Olympic voices in the country have grown louder. The medical doctors here, the Medical Association, they are warning of the potential of a super spreader event. They even say that there's the potential of an Olympic variant that can be bred through having people from 200 different countries get together, which could be potentially more fatal than the Indian or the British variant. While at the same time, the IOC, JOC, and the TOC claim that the games will be safe. There are now, in addition, 2 of the different playbooks. We have next month a 3rd edition of the different playbooks for the different stakeholders that participants, athletes, officials, IOC family, and so on. So they portray really tight rules and regulations, but medical experts have warned that there are loopholes. And I think there's a problem between Tatemai and Hone. So one is what the rules tell us, and the other is, what is the human element in all of this? Will people, particularly in the IOC family, which is a much larger group than the athletes, and who stay in luxury hotels throughout Tokyo, how will they comply fully? And how is the policing being done of these more or less 100,000 foreigners coming into Japan? So we don't hear all that much yet about the policing aspect of it. Still an open question, is this an event with a live audience in the stadiums? Or is that going to be an a TV only event? And then for whom testing or vaccine requirements are done? I am one of the volunteers, and there is no talk of testing for everybody. There's no talk of vaccines for everybody. So with that, just briefly, and apologize for the phone ringing, that would be me. So thanks.
So Professor Taniguchi, you have been following this for a number of years with the how Japan applied for the Olympics and how what's been happening. Your thoughts, was this to be expected?
First off, Barbara's presentation was informative, compelling, and tells us all that one has to get prepared for the worst case scenario. That all said, if I may add a short footnote to her presentation, first off, if you compare the numbers speak volumes. Those tested positive in Sweden, for instance, numbered 105,000. In Germany, the number was 44,000. And Japan, 5,800. The number of cases in Sweden was 18 times, Germany 7 times. If you look at the death toll, it's even more apparent. Sweden has had 1,431 fatalities, Germany 1,055, Japan 102, all against, by the way, 1 million population. So Sweden has had 14 times, Germany 10 times. Among G7 countries, Japan by far has been the best performer I think that's the foundation on which you must put everything into perspective. Athletes and members of the national delegations will come to Japan in a massive number for sure, but most of them will have come vaccinated. And most unfortunately, they are not going to be allowed to wander around and mingle together with local people. This is very much unfortunate. However, they will remain in a tight bubble, so-called, and testing, PCR testing is going to be conducted each and every day. In a way, this event is going to be very much a simplified, modest, but straightforward event. Delegations, athletes will come to join the competitions, and after the competitions, they will fly back. But the event, I think, will remind you of the good old days of the Olympic Games, when athletes were the main actors, and the whole purpose was to get moved, touched, and excited by the blood, sweat, and tears shed by those athletes who have had to wait for 5 long years. That's it from me.
Yeah. I agree completely. My question is that in your years with Prime Minister Abe, did this topic at any time come up?
What's this topic? Oh,
a
pandemic. Pandemic visited all of us January 2020.
Yeah.
And the government of Japan under Shinzo Abe and his successor has been coping with this situation as much as any other national government.
Yeah.
So Olympic Games had to be postponed once, but after we have gotten more familiar with the disease itself and how one should prevent it from getting infected, I think there is wisdom held more widely than before about the safety and about the possibility that the games will be conducted. That said, as Barbara pointed out, the decision is yet to be made as to whether or not those games will be having audiences, or there will be no audience at all.
Let me turn to our third panelist, Miss Vanessa Osell-Tsuruga. Vanessa, you have studied, you actually have a degree in Olympic studies. How do you regard this, what's happening now? Are you afraid? Are you looking forward? What's your thought?
Well, my thoughts are that I think as a nation, as people living in Japan, we have to face this situation in the best way possible and still try to go forward with the initial plan. As Taniguchi-san mentioned, I mean, this is a plan that was made back in 2013, where Prime Minister Abe promised to deliver safe pair of hands of Olympics. I think we're in a position right now where we're calling it the Recovery Olympics. We might need to find a more suitable name. And as I was preparing for this talk, I was thinking maybe we should call it the Rising Olympics. It's a time where Japan is gonna sort of rise back up. Some of the vaccinations are being rolled out at the moment. So yeah, just as a suggestion, maybe we should call it the Rising Olympics and hope for the best. Back to you, John.
If I turn again to Barbara, you have followed how Japan has prepared, and there's so many volunteers and people are really, they have taken part in this. What would it mean if this was to be cancelled?
Well, I actually think it should not be canceled, but it should be postponed again to a time when we're done with the pandemic, right? So cancellation would be, of course, devastating. And a cancellation, I think, would mean to, I think, the government, since I laid out all the vision and hopes and dreams for the pandemic, that then Japan would try again to get the Olympics to Japan, right? So, you know, the dreams all would be crushed if it were to be canceled completely without any future dates to hold it. Of course, I mean, I'm one of the 110,000 volunteers. There are a lot of also individual and personal reasons why people want to volunteer, not just because they're sport fans, but also because they want to make new friends and also friends from all over the world. So it was actually really important for the volunteers to have also international volunteers. I happen to be an international person living in Japan, so I'm still able to do it. But the mingling of different nations within the volunteer community, which is really important, is not happening even now, even if we hold it now. So of course, we haven't talked about the economy. That is, I'm a sociologist, but you know, no matter how you turn it, if you don't hold them or delay it, or right now already, it's devastating anyway. I can't even, the numbers are mind-boggling. But I have heard or read about economic reports that they say that if it were to become a super spreader event, the impact on the economy would be worse than if they were canceled or not, at least not held in 2021. But I think that also needs to be considered.
Taniguchi-san, what would it mean for Japan to have to cancel or postpone this in your eyes?
Cancellation is one possibility, although I disagree that it's going to happen. But postponement is no starter. And the reason is athletes have been waiting for 5 long years, and enough is going to be what those athletes will say. One must always come back to the bottom line that we hold these sport games for athletes who have sacrificed so much to compete once every 4 years. Postponing once again is out of question.
If you look at the economical, Barbara was into that, the economical consequences, it's a lot of money have been spent on this. Does this in any way affect Japan?
The government and the country, people therein, have had to give up already a lot of things, including economic benefits. That is 400,000 big population from abroad were supposed to come to Japan and go back and forth between Tokyo and local tourist destinations, should have spent so much amount of money. All that dream has been shattered. Likewise, volunteers, yes, they have been keen on taking part in this Olympic event. Their dream has been shattered, and that's already happened. No additional cost is going to incur.
How would you see moving forward now? What is the best way that the government can do now?
The best way is something that the IOC and the organizing committee in Tokyo and Tokyo government and the central government of Japan have been discussing almost every day. However, vaccination in Japan is finally, although belatedly, gaining tempo and acceleration. 1 million shots a day seems to be within reach. So my hope is in 1 month time, the picture will have looked dramatically differently. With that or without that, the fact remains athletes and delegations coming from abroad to Japan are supposed to have gone through vaccination process. And as I said, they can't mingle with the local people and they can't go elsewhere than athletic stadiums and so on. And PCR testing is going to be conducted every day.
If I turn to Vanessa and Barbara, vaccinations, you are foreigners living in Japan. Is this happening? Are you offered vaccinations or what does it look like?
I'm quite sure that I will be receiving this information when the time is right. At the moment, I'm reading about it in the media, and just for transparency's sake, I'm married to a Japanese man, and he also has not gotten this information yet personally to him. So I don't think it's a question of being Japanese or a foreigner, but I do think that this vaccination will roll out, and it's going to make a lot of us very, very happy.
Barbara, have you seen any shots so far?
No, I mean, that's I mean, no, it's the elderly, and since as we hear from the media that the medical personnel that has not even 100% gotten their second shots, you know, I think there is a jumban, there's an order to which the vaccine should be rolled out, the ones that are most endangered of catching the virus, of course, should go first, and that is the standard in most countries. Of course, in my country now, after, I mean, they started in late December, and by next week, by about June 7th, I think they're going to be stopping with the prioritization. Yet not everybody has gotten theirs, and Germany has been doing it since late December. So it does take a while. So I mean, the most recent news about the vaccine rollout in Japan makes me also rather hopeful. And I hope that the very slow beginning and seemingly a little bit confusing who's in charge, and that only now the big vaccination locations are opening up. But that sounds really nice, and I really hope Japan can really speed this up and get the vaccines into people's arms. But if I may, I wanted to, Mr. Taniguchi just respond to that, and I think I really want to I support that of course the athletes are the ones that would be most suffering from all this. They have been suffering because a lot of them already can't compete now because they've now been too old, because they had to already wait a year. It must have been really hard to even train in this 1 year. So of course they're the ones that suffer most. Yet when you're talking about PCR testing for everyone every day, I would like to say, if I understand the playbooks correctly, that is a requirement for the athletes only. That is not, and the athletes are about 15,000. We're talking about a much larger number, from what I read, about 80,000 IOC family people that come in, media people, functionaries, coaches, trainers, that do not have necessarily are vaccinated. And I don't know, are they all tested every single day? And another question, we have the virus in Japan, and volunteers volunteers and local staff work every day, and there is no such thing there. So if you really want to make it tight, safe, then you really need to talk about these people too. And so I think PCR testing for every day is really just the athletes, as far as I understand.
I think one question that a lot of people, including myself, are concerned with is that Japan, as a very highly professional medical country with all the facilities, that the vaccinations have not started earlier. How come this is? If I start that question with Taniguchi-san, well, do you have any theories about that? What do you think?
That actually has troubled a lot of people, including myself. And the prioritization has been in such a way as would highlight the age group of above 65 years old, plus medical professionals. The aim here is to give almost a full coverage, 90, 100% if possible, to those age bracket, those people in the age bracket. Now, whether or not members of the delegation, coaches, and other people will have to go through the same procedure as athletes is exactly the issue that the IOC, Tokyo, and the organizing committee have been discussing. And I think if necessary, the PCR testing is going to be widened so that it would include those people other than athletes. And I have to say, with disappointment, of course, there has been much reduced need for volunteers from abroad or from within. So there will be a much smaller number of people working as volunteers. After all, they are the ones that were supposed to help provide information and assistance to a much bigger number of people that were supposed to come to Japan.
And the fact that there is no Japanese vaccine or COVID vaccine. Well, do you have any thoughts on that? Why don't we see that?
Number one, legal risks. There were some prominent legal risks involved some time ago about vaccination, and medical professionals and pharmaceutical companies became very much hesitant in going forward. Second, the government should have given much more ample amount of money to pharmaceutical companies. Third, I think it's too late, because if you look at other countries, vaccination is gaining tempo, and it makes it, ironically, the population of those unaffected and those have not given, have been given shots, the number of those people has been constantly on the decline. So the testing base here has gotten smaller yet. It's most unfortunate for Japanese pharmaceutical companies.
If I turn to Vanessa, I know you have small children. When you're out and about in the city, how are your concerns? Are you afraid that they will catch the corona, or what do you talk with to other parents?
No, I'm not afraid that they will catch anything. And this is something where I really want to applaud the individuals of Japan throughout this pandemic, because you walk outside and everybody is wearing a mask. On a day, you might see 1 or 2 people at most who are not wearing a mask. I have 3 children, preschool and elementary school. Every morning I check their temperatures. We write it. The teacher, gives the hanko, the stamp. The teacher asks every day when I drop off the kids if the family's well. So the fact that there is a very intricate system put in place makes me think that my children are very, very safe. And if my children are safe, who are basically hanging out with another 100 children every day, then I actually feel quite safe as well.
Barbara, any input here? How do you feel? Do you feel unsafe, or what is your thoughts?
Well, I mean, at my office, we have the opportunity to work from home, so the teleworking, right? Which is not an opportunity for all Japanese. My son has to commute to school for an hour on a very busy train, so naturally I am concerned about that. Like Vanessa was saying, yes, the norm to wear masks, I mean, that was a very early response in Japan. And I think that really, and there's a much greater willingness overall to wear a mask. And that's been here for a long time. People who come, have been visited Japan before, we're always like, wow, Japanese are wearing masks. But now, of course, worldwide people are used to masks. So that was really in Japan's favor. And people, yeah, the norm is you comply, you wear them even outside. However, the fact that part of this, the coronavirus governmental response is to not allow restaurants to open up after 8 p.m. Is a little bit, well, let's say, it's like, it kind of portrays like the virus only hits at 8 p.m., right? Anything nighttime, whereas aerosols, of course, can be hanging out all the time. And I have started walking to work or bicycling to work. I have that opportunity, so I don't have to get on the trains. But I see restaurants that don't comply to being closed or closing at 8 p.m. So, and people sit close to each other without a mask. So I am concerned about that. And, but overall, outside, definitely people are very compliant. Without having this as a rule, like in Germany, there's, you're forced to do that. Otherwise you have to pay a penalty. If you are not wearing an FFP2 mask on the bus, boom, you get penalized by so and so much euros. But in Japan, there's never been the law that you have to comply. Most people do it willingly, and that is, of course, wonderful.
I promised before that we would have some time open for questions and answer, and I'm happy to see that we have actually gotten a few questions here. So I will start by reading one from Jon Helly. And he says, how is the situation between the growing opposition against the Olympics and the IOC and the authorities? Could the public opinion shift if the event will happen or not? If I pose that to you, Taniguchi-san, what are your thoughts?
True, some of the broadsheet newspapers in Japan have run editorials openly opposed to Tokyo going forward and having Olympic Games. But my sense is people are just in mixed emotions. Sometimes they think they can do that. Other times they think they should be more cautious. Today they are more optimistic. Next day, they may be more pessimistic. And that'll be a function of the spread of vaccinations for one thing. And if you tend to be optimistic, then you could say from a month, in a month from now, with the senior citizens getting vaccinations, the picture and the public sentiment will have changed from what they are now.
But if you compare with the Olympics in 1964, they were so brilliantly performed and so successful. And now we have a situation where it's not as... I used to enjoy
I understand.
it,
I understand what you mean.
Yeah.
I understand what you mean. Tokyo 1964 sometimes is called the best ever Olympic Games because it was held before international TV network dominating the scene, and it took place before professionalism, not amateurism, prevailed. Avery Brandage, then head of IOC, was very much rigorous in maintaining the ideology of amateurism. And Tokyo 1964 was a showcase of that. In addition to that, it took place 19 years after the war, and it took place as the first ever games ever conducted outside of the Western society, the first in Asia. And Japan held its own, let's say, coming of age party, if you like. So you cannot compare Tokyo 2020 with Tokyo 1964. However, most ironically, Tokyo 2020 or Tokyo 2021 is going to be the event solely, chiefly for the athletes. Opening ceremony, closing ceremony, they no longer matter. And national symbols will have rather diminished significance. So for me, Tokyo 2020 will remind me of what it was like in 1964, because I'm old enough to remember what Tokyo 1964 was like.
We're not going to talk about age here, but if I send the question to Vanessa and Barbara, you live in Tokyo. How are your feelings towards Olympics now? Tokyo is a big city and there's many things going on. How important are these Olympics?
Do I go first?
Please.
I mean, the Olympics, it's a memory of a lifetime. And I speak personally because I grew up with the Olympics. I was in Barcelona in '92. I worked in London at the London Olympics. I went to Rio for the Rio Olympics. Attending an Olympic game, either as a visitor or a host, and sucking in, absorbing that atmosphere is something you really kind of need to be there to understand it. It's so huge, right? So while I think that the Olympic impact of sorts will be diminished at these games coming up, I actually think that performance-wise, we might see more world records than ever, because people are going in with a mindset of like, I'm just gonna make this the best ever games that I ever had because I have a second chance at it. So I'll take a stab at saying that these performance-wise are gonna be amazing games.
Barbara, what world records, how many?
No idea, but I would like to caution that maybe the countries where the virus was brought under control earlier, where athletes had the opportunity to train well, then yes, they might actually be far ahead from the competition. But I'm by heart, I'm a sociologist. I'm not just an inhabitant of Tokyo. So and equality is an important element to me. And I think Is it really fair games? Because some countries might not have had that opportunity. Hey, I don't know how the virus situation is in these 200 countries at all, but I'm a little afraid that some countries and some athletes might not have had the opportunities to train during the pandemic as others, or particularly in the US or countries where they're much far ahead.
We have one more question. As for the competitions themselves, what are the hopes for gold medals on the Japanese side? And I think I will put this question to Taniguchi-san. What do you think?
I think athletes from Japan and elsewhere are telling themselves that to have it is the best that they could achieve. And to compete really on the ground is something that they wished for. Gold medal, silver, bronze, they will be bonuses. But to compete this year after 5 years waiting is the best bonus ever for the athletes. And I think audiences, real, virtual, international, domestic, will come to view those athletes as if they are looking at, say, the Greek sculpture of discus thrower, the simplistic beauty of muscle power and harmony between willpower and muscle power. Those will be in display and people will be excited at those scenes.
I think those are very fitting words to, we still have a few minutes. When we don't have all these tourists coming into Tokyo, how will, I'm thinking the restaurants and the bars and the hotels, they will not have such a good time. How will they look back on these Olympics? Barbara,
well,
please.
it's not just about Olympics. They have had to undergo tremendous challenges, and many restaurants and many in the hospitality businesses have gone out of business. I have lost 2 or 3 my favorite restaurants in Tokyo already. Bookstores are closing. You know, that's what's going on now, with or without Olympics. So they are very much hoping that the situation is going to turn for the better and sooner rather than later.
Yeah, if I may chime in there, yeah,
Please.
Yeah, I mean, it's the people that work in restaurants, the people that have lost their jobs at some point, and that's months ago. We heard the number of 500,000 having lost their jobs or being really in such temporary employment that they can't afford housing anymore. I live in Shinjuku. I walk by homeless every day, and we know the social net compared to Europe is way less, and I fear for people, but be they in the restaurant business or whatever, that greatly suffer from the pandemic, and without much of a safety net to fall back on. And that is something that Japan will have to deal with for many years, unfortunately, to come, that fallout from the pandemic.
I have no reason to disagree with that, but it has to be taken into consideration. As was mentioned, Japan has undergone no lockdown whatsoever. And so even with a diminished scale, many of those restaurants have opened their stores and shops. That's good news. And on top of that, may I just remind you that Japan's record shows that it's been doing much, much better than most other developed nations.
Yeah, I have to agree with you, the Taniguchi-san. I think Japan is very much prepared to handle a situation like this. Let's just hope that it works out in the end. That having said, I think we are approaching the time of our 1 hour webinar. So I would like to thank Ms. Vanessa Holtes and Dr. Barbara Holtes and of course Mr. Tomohiko Taniguchi for your time. I'm sure there will be lots of time and opportunities to return to this issue coming up. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.